Hi, welcome to a current events seminar. This is something I'm doing for the students in all my classes, but I'll make it widely available. And what I want to talk about are the upcoming Italian regional elections that are going to take place on Sunday and Monday, so the 20th and 21st of September. Now, what I think we should do is talk about the regional elections, but remember, there's also a constitutional referendum that's taking place. And the questions that we want to ask are, what are the implications for Italy's political parties, particularly the major political parties, the Lega, the PD, the Five Star Movement? What are the implications for the governing coalition, which is a coalition that's comprised of the Democratic Party and the Five Star Movement together with Italia Viva? What are the implications for Italy and Europe, right? Because Italy is an important country, and yet Italy has implications that extend far beyond the Alps, so to speak. And how can we learn more? Right? Because I think I can only give you an introduction to this set of issues, and yet I have some colleagues who might be able to give you something a bit more profound. Well, the regional elections that are taking place are actually elections that were delayed in response to the novel coronavirus pandemic, and there are 7 regions in play. In the south of the country is Campania, and then up in the north of the country we would look at Liguria, Val d'Aosta, and the Veneto. I should have mentioned that Puglia is also in the south, and then in the middle of the country we have Le Marche and Tuscany, or Toscana. I don't know why I insist on pronouncing these things. I guess my main concern is that I don't like calling Livorno Leghorn, which is the English word for that city. Anyway, these regional elections are widely anticipated in terms of their outcome. Most people expect, and the polling numbers running into the election were pretty clear on this, that the PD is expected to win in Campania. The center-right is expected to win in Liguria, Le Marche, Puglia, and Veneto. Val d'Aosta doesn't actually elect a regional president, but the Lega is supposed to get the largest number or largest percentage of votes going into the regional chamber, which will elect a president. So all that stuff is really known, and the big question mark is what's going to happen in Tuscany. Tuscany, as you all know, is traditionally a left-wing region in Italy. It's been dominated by the left for decades, and yet now suddenly it seems as though the center-right has fielded a candidate against a center-left candidate who's brought it up to neck and neck. The constitutional referendum that's going to take place at the same time will happen across the country. And that constitutional referendum is important because it's going to change the number of seats in both chambers of the Italian parliament. You see, the Constitution specifies at the moment that there are 315 senators. There are unlimited number of life-term senators that go on top of that, but 315 elected senators, 630 members of the Chamber of Deputies, and the proposal is to reduce those numbers to 200 and 400 for those two chambers respectively. And if the proposal passes, obviously they'll need to redraw the electoral map, they'll need to redistrict everything, and indeed they're in the context right now of organizing a new electoral system to go along with it. So if it passes, that would lead to a significant number of major changes. But also, and I think it's important to know, the fact of the referendum is important. You see, this referendum was supposed to have been held in March. It was not held because of the novel coronavirus pandemic, but that means that we've had a constitutional parenthesis open in Italy as we've been waiting to see how many seats there should be in both chambers. And so long as this constitutional parenthesis is open, it's not possible really for President Sergio Mattarella, the President of the Republic, to dissolve Parliament and call new elections because he doesn't know how many people need to get elected. So we needed to have this parentheses close in order for it to be even conceivable that they would dissolve Parliament. So the fact of this is important because it means that we're entering into a more normal period of political engineering, one in which the parliament can be dissolved and new elections can be held. I'm not saying that they will be. We'll talk a little bit about the coalition dynamics later, but I just want to say that in technical terms, the fact of this referendum is important. And what the polls have shown consistently is that many people in Italy, over 70% of the population, support the reduction in the number of members of parliament. I mean, it's an easy argument to support. Everybody knows how expensive Italian parliamentarians are, so by promising to have fewer of them, you lower the cost of the parliament. But that easy analysis belies a much more sophisticated and a much more complicated political dynamic beneath. So while on the one hand, it's easy to imagine that 70% of the population actually agrees with the idea of reducing the number of members of parliament, there are strong arguments and strong groups lobbying against that, arguing that instead Italy is a country that really does need this large level of representation, that in a balanced bicameral framework such as there is, they need these representatives to engage actively in the legislative process. Certainly the way the two chambers are set up is to deploy this large number of people, and they will have to reorganize the internal legislative functioning if the number of people is diminished. There are also concerns that this will convince people that they don't need to reform the Italian political environment any further, when in fact there are strong arguments that have been made consistently, including in 2016 when we had the last big constitutional referendum, that Italy needs a new constitutional arrangement in order to streamline the process of government. The people who are making these arguments are on the right and on the left. They include the surviving generation that drafted the Constitution in the first place, but also the youngest generation, the Sardines movement. A lot of young people are mobilizing in that movement to change the way politics works, and curiously, they're mobilizing against this constitutional reform for some of the reasons that I mentioned. So, although the constitutional referendum is pretty much guaranteed to go to pass, that doesn't mean it's not an important political debate. So what are the implications for political parties? Well, I think we can say that the center right is going to come out of this smelling of victory as a coalition. But look at the party dynamics, and the situation becomes more interesting, right? In Le Marche, for example, Francesco Acquaroli is not from the Lega. He's from Fratelli d'Italia, in other words, from Giorgia Meloni's party, which has been rising in support on the center right. And so his success there is not going to be a success for Matteo Salvini and the Lega. It's actually going to be a source of irritation, despite the fact that having a right-wing government is something that the Lega is willing to support and has been supporting throughout this campaign. Look at what's going on in the Veneto, where the president of the region, Luca Zaia, has come out of the pandemic with a very strengthened reputation for efficient management. And people are looking at the Veneto contest to see whether Zaia might actually be able to challenge Matteo Salvini in terms of his leadership of the center-right coalition. So while on the one hand, it's going to be a clear win for the center-right, on the other hand, it does represent some interesting points of change. The five-star movement is going to face another blowout. The interesting question there is just how badly they're going to do. It's unlikely to result in a change in the five-star movement, but it is likely to create a number of new tremors within the movement, and we'll continue to read news stories about how the five-star movement is trying to evolve out of the particular ditch that it's in at the moment. The Democratic Party could suffer a significant humiliation. I don't think this is going to result in a leadership change in that party either, but it will dent Nicola Zingaretti as leader of the PD if he can't hold on to Tuscany and indeed raise questions about where that party is really headed. And indeed, if the referendum were to fail and the constitutional reforms were to be rejected, things could get really weird, right? I mean, I think the five-star movement would suffer a massive humiliation in that context. I'm not quite sure where the five-star movement goes as a result, but I am sure that it would raise a series of important question marks about how effective the movement has been in government, particularly when you look at the size of it in March 2018 and compare it to the size of it in the present, right? It's dropped from the mid-30s to the mid-teens. If it falls below 10% in this blowout and then loses the constitutional referendum, that will raise some serious issues. Having said that, I don't think that we're going to see an end to this governing coalition, right? As humiliating as a loss in the referendum would be for the Five-Star Movement, as humiliating as a loss in Tuscany would be for the Democratic Party, the result will be more fragility. They won't love each other. They certainly won't love the implications of being in coalition with one another. But it doesn't improve the alternative, right? I mean, what is the alternative for either of these parties? And indeed, we should look at it at Matteo Renzi's Italia Viva. Renzi is not supporting the PD candidate in Tuscany. That's got to be a source of frustration. There's all this tension that's going on, and yet, where do these guys go? Right, particularly if, as I've argued again, it's possible to call new elections after the referendum is held. Does anybody in the governing coalition have any desire to see those elections take place? I don't think so. So I think we're going to see the government stay together, and I think the party leadership is probably going to remain the same. But a weakening in a sense of fragility, a heightened sense that this is a government that's running out of energy, I think is not out of the question. And that weakness, I would argue, is a bigger threat to Europe than the bond market prices are showing. So if you were to look at Italian sovereign debt trading in the markets right now, you would see that the price is very high, the yields are very low, particularly relative to what they were in March when the novel coronavirus pandemic broke out. But the reason for that stability in the bond markets is really because the ECB, European Central Bank, is buying so much Italian sovereign debt, and because psychologically the ECB has made it clear that it's not going to allow Italian sovereign debt markets to get out of control. Having said that, the governing coalition is fragile, and it has a shockingly complicated legislative agenda ahead of it, right? There are all these economic support programs for firms and unemployed workers or furloughed workers that have been extended, but that will continue to need some kind of extension until the economy begins to recover. You can't have a cliff edge where these things just run out and people don't have any money. And that cliff edge is coming in a number of different programs, all of which need to be dealt with, and none of which are points of agreement within the governing coalition. At the same time, Italy has to tackle difficult budgetary issues as it prepares the budget for 2021. But also, in the back of your mind, you have to remember that at some point next spring, they're probably going to have a conversation about deactivating the general escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact, which means that at a certain point next spring, the Italian government is going to have to start thinking about how on earth it's going to get back into the kind of fiscal probity that's required by the European semester as it prepares the budget for 2022. I know we're looking at the budget for 2021 right now, but the fact of the matter is all these things are linked because what's decided for 2021 is going to set the structural context for 2022. And there's a lot of disagreement about that as well. Then they have to negotiate within the governing coalition what the national recovery program is going to look like so that they can access the next generation EU funds. That's a complicated thing in itself, particularly when you consider the Five-Star Movement's attitudes towards major infrastructure projects, some of which it supports and others which it finds more challenging. As a consequence of which, I think we've got a lot of debate that's got to take place within the governing coalition. And the weaker it is, the more likely or the more susceptible it becomes to having a kind of a political accident. And again, I just want to emphasize this. If they have a political accident, there is no alternative majority in the Italian parliament. It's difficult to form any coalition in this parliament, but it's impossible to form an effective working majority if you don't have at least two of the following three parties, the PD, the Five-Star Movement, and the Lega. And if this government falls and the relationship between the PD and the Five-Star Movement collapses, how do you get any two of those three together? You don't. So you have to go back to the polls. So a political accident at this point would be bad for Europe. And I would say the risks are rising even if the bond market prices are stable. Okay, so that's just my opinion. I have some colleagues who are much greater experts than I am, and so I would encourage you, if you think this is interesting, to come back on the eve of the 21st as the first results are becoming known. We are going to have a webinar that will be hosted at SAIS Europe. That will include Donatella Campos from the University of Bologna, Justin Frosini, who's from SAIS, but whose day job is at Bocconi University, and our own Gianfranco Pasquino. They're gonna analyze the outcomes in real time on the 21st of September, which is a Monday, at 18:30, so 6:30 p.m. for those of you who, like me, grew up in the United States, in Bologna time. You can find out more information about that seminar by clicking on the website for the Bologna Institute for Policy Research, www.bipr.eu, and I hope I'll see you there. Thanks a lot for your time.